July, wasn't it? So welcome back. I hope you all had a good summer. Before we get going, let me start with the announcement. So can I remind everybody, this meeting's being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and it's going to be archived for future viewing. So could all participants mute themselves when you're not speaking? And if participants wish to speak, use the raise hand function, or if you would rather, and you can be seen, just put your hand up and either myself or Mark will see you and call you in so you can speak. Please don't use the chat function to raise debate, and only use this if you're experiencing technical issues or you believe you can't be heard or you can't hear us, if that's okay. I don't think we have any absences, so I don't think there's any apologies for absence. Everybody's come back, so that's wonderful. So next on the agenda, which is item number 2, will be the minutes of the meetings. Now we've got 2 sets of meetings because we haven't been able to meet in the last couple of months. So those are the ones held on the 16th of June and the 13th of July. So can we recommend that these minutes of the meetings can be approved as correct records? Can I see a hand from anybody, or does anybody want to
accept, Chair? Happy to accept, Chair. Councillor Hanks.
Thank you so much. And can we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Marvellous. Thank you, guys and girls. Let's move on to the next point then, which is item number 3, declarations of interest. Have we had anything, Mark? I haven't had anything.
I haven't had anything directly, Chair.
Good. Okay, so let's move swiftly on. We do have a bumper committee meeting with lots and lots of things to discuss tonight. So item 4 on the agenda is the Vale of Glumb annual performance calendar 2022-2023. Now Cabinet sat on the 7th of July and considered and endorsed this calendar. So they've referred this report now to us, the Scrutiny Committee, and also it will go to the Governance and Audit Committee for consideration. So in this report, we've got the key plans, including engagement with new members, support the shaping of this process, plans and reports. And we have Tom with us, Tom Bowring, who's going to provide more detail. Over to you,
Thanks.
Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, committee. Thanks very much for taking this reference. As you said, it's come from Cabinet in July and is making its way through all of the scrutiny committees, including Governance and Audit Committee. The report does 2 primary things, Chair. One, outline the new performance duties that are included in the Local Government and Elections Act, and particularly gives an update in terms of the self-assessment process. For expediency, though, I know you've got an agenda item on the self-assessment later on, so I'll cover that aspect when we get to that agenda item. But what I wanted to draw committee's attention to, with your permission, is Appendix A to the report, which is the calendar itself. We thought with the new duties that have been introduced and also a number of new elected members after the local government elections this year, that it would be useful just to put all of this in one place so that elected members can see how all of the various aspects of the performance calendar fit together, and importantly as well, put in place the opportunity for elected members to shape some of this work as well. So committee will note that there are some light blue shaded boxes within Appendix A. That's in recognition of the kind of informal, if you like, opportunities for elected members to convene to discuss various aspects of this performance work. That was something that Councillor Johnson raised with me in this scrutiny committee, but back in the winter, I think it was January or early February, Councillor Johnson, about the need to explore different ways of presenting information to enable scrutiny to be as effective as possible, given the time that you have on agendas. I'm grateful to elected members who've participated in the first two of those sessions, initially looking at the self-assessment, and that's informed how I'll present that report later on this evening, Chair, and also in the last couple of weeks around how we report on quarterly performance, and the discussions that elected members had at that session will directly inform quarter two's performance reporting that I'll be bringing to you later on in the year. So really just a kind of information report, bringing it all together so that elected members can see how all of this works, but also introducing that opportunity for elected members to have an influence in some of those discussion forums as well. So that's the report for you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Tom. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask about this? Oh, yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction and the name check. And for the bit of history, there is that that a lot of this material is being brought to us, sort of fairly late in the day, and it was felt to be quite difficult to try and wrap our heads around it as a committee and to genuinely scrutinise, sort of quite large and lengthy documents. Obviously, this is come from a new. Stuff being handed down from Welsh Government in terms of different ways of doing these things. I'm just looking, and I appreciate that we've got a sort of the drafts coming later on today, but I'm just looking to see how or have explained how we can dovetail the work that's already taking place, avoid duplication of what's going on. Are we content that we're not just reinventing the wheel, sort of in the way that we're approaching this? Thank you, Chair.
Can I just double check, Councillor Johnson, do you mean in terms of not reinventing the wheel, as in we're not starting from scratch in terms of how we approach our new duties under the local government elections?
I want to make sure that the work that's already being undertaken, has been undertaken, is dovetailing nicely with the new duties, and so we're not ending up with structures that sit apart from each other and don't interact and engage.
Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Johnson. Absolutely, we've sought wherever possible to utilise existing mechanisms and really build on them to make sure that we're meeting the new duties. An example of that is around the new duty around self-assessment, for example, which the Act requires us to be able to demonstrate how we achieve value for money in terms of using our resources to deliver our objectives. That's a slightly more specific duty than was under the local government measure, which was more focused on the objectives themselves. So we've always produced an annual report which is focused in on the outcomes and objectives element. This year what we've done is supplement that with the value for money piece so that it meets the new duty. So yeah, absolutely not starting from scratch and looking to dovetail where we possibly can.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom. Just a point of clarification in relation to the member workshops and the member engagement that you referenced through Appendix A, so that's really useful. And in particular, would it be possible for those like myself who are new members that we could have ensure the information is sent in advance? And is there any capacity to include some sort of jargon buster? Because I fear that sometimes we do get we're quite happy with our jargon, and I suppose as a new member I'm au fait with a few terms, but there's still a lot that I'm still learning, and if I want to feed into this as I'd like to, I want to make sure that I'm fully aware of your definitions are the same as mine, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and absolutely, in terms of sharing information in advance of any of those discussion sessions, absolutely not a problem at all. And I'll make sure that that's done for the next iteration, and the next session will focus in on service plans, target setting, which is a really big piece of work for scrutiny committees to consider. So I'm very conscious of wanting to make that a really worthwhile session, and absolutely, in terms of jargon, I assure you we try very hard pardon when I'm reviewing and moderating and clearing the reports prior to committee. I try hard to apply the plain English filter, but sometimes it does slip. So feel free to call me out on it, and we'll also do our best to make sure we avoid that jargon in the future. But thank you for the reminder.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. I like to think on this committee that we would be, without a shadow of a doubt, quite confident to say when we would need something to be explained to us, and I will be leading the way on that one. So, so that's great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions on the calendar itself? No? Okay, so no recommendations then going back on this one. Can we say that we've noted the content? Can I have a hand for that so we can move?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you ever so much. And can we have a seconder? Yeah, do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Or is your hand in the air because you want to speak?
No, it was for seconding.
Thank you ever so much. Great, lovely. So I think now then we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the closure of accounts for 2022. Now, Cabinet on the 21st of July considered and resolved that the report and the financial measures be approved, and that the final amended report for 2022 and for the budget be approved, and for Scrutiny Committee to consider and to review the year-end position. So we don't have Matt with us today. No,
no, Chair, it's me, Gemma.
Oh, Gemma, that's great.
Hi.
Over to you then, Gemma. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just mute myself one moment while I try and get some quiet. Okay, we have quiet. Chair, as you pointed out, this report was written back in July. So obviously, in terms of the economic position, that has changed somewhat since even back in July. But I suppose the headlines of this report are we received a lot of grants quite late in the financial year, and that resulted in quite significant increases in reserves for the council. So I'll just draw out some key points in the report. We received additional revenue support grant in March, and as such we increased the base budget for the council by just under 2.5 million, and that was allocated as a sum of 1.5 million in neighbourhood services to offset the overspend against waste, 540,000 towards the Oracle implementation, and 408,000 that was ring fenced within that sum to reserves for electric vehicles lessons and licences pilot in social services. Overall, the reserves increased by just over 80 million after adjusting for capital and insurance drawdown. Revenue transferred just under 19.5 million into reserves, which included 642,000 into the council fund. A significant proportion of this funding was required to be ring fenced and spent in accordance with the grant criteria. School balances increased by 6 million, taking them to just under 13 million. Capital funding for schools maintenance and some additional funding for free school meal adaptations were also transferred into reserves, and that was just over 3 million. Funding was allocated in relation to the shortfall on council tax collection, and that was 1.249 million, and that was ring fenced specifically to deal with the ongoing impact of COVID. We received significant social care pressures grant, which was allocated into reserves to be utilised to support the social services budget programme. And we also received funding in advance of 22-23 for the cost of living discretionary scheme, and that was transferred into reserves to be matched against payments made in this financial year. We did have some underspends against capital financing costs, which is because the council continues to maximise its internal borrowing and therefore it pays less borrowing costs externally. And we also received some additional council tax income in year, which partly reflects increased development in the region. And those surpluses were used to finance capital schemes in 22-23. And these schemes include things like improvements at Barry Island and the country parks, and were set out in the final revenue proposals for and capital proposals for 22-23. HRA is ring fenced and reported a surplus of just over 5 million at year end, and therefore the HRA reserve increased to just over 17 million at year end, and the level of that reserve is higher than we had previously projected in the current housing business plan, but that was mainly due to the reduction in the revenue contribution to capital programme due to various delays in delivering the capital programme, such as the inflationary costs and costs with and delays in securing professional skills, etc. Just one other thing to flag up on this report, there was a shortfall against the council's efficiency target in year of 120,000, and we have experienced some time lags associated with implementing some of these savings, but what we are doing in 22-23 is continuing to monitor those savings until they're achieved. Happy to pick up any questions on the report.
Gemma, I can see we have Councillor Johnson, his hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gemma. Obviously, this is a fairly historical report because we're in quarter three of the following year, and obviously this is the first chance we've had to discuss last year's figures. I think during the year, when this committee was looking at the figures, they looked quite different to where they were at year end, which is because of the additional grants that have come in. The question I have on that is how that. This is the situation at year end, which is just a dot in the year rather than necessarily anything particularly meaningful because of the way this money is coming in. And we end up with a couple of years running now, we've ended up with magic money tree at the end of the year after we spent a lot of time looking through the in-year figures and being quite concerned. So I'm kind of just checking from our perspective, that those grants were earmarked for specific purposes. Are those grants being utilised, and how is that feeding into? Or does that feed into the way that we look at the annual report of this? I hope that makes sense as a question. And also just on the housing revenue account. The aim in our business plan, as you were saying, is that we shouldn't really have very much in the HRA account at all. In fact, normally we're aiming to have around £1 million in there as working balance, and we've now managed to got it back up to 17 million. So for several years now, we've been told that we're going to spend it, we are going to spend it. And yet that keeps going up. So I just want to make sure we don't have a sort of a ratcheting effect in terms of our reserves. That it keeps just we get more money at the end of the year, but then we've tried to run a balanced budget for the year ahead, and also just want some sort of a little indication as to how we're going on the HRA for as we go forward. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gemma.
Okay. Thank you. So I think where those reserves are being ring-fenced to deliver capital schemes, such as the schools maintenance and free school meals, they are being spent in this financial year. We are making progress in spending those. Things like the cost of living discretionary funding, again, we are certainly making progress in spending those. So where they are specifically allocated towards the delivery of grant schemes, I think we are making progress. In terms of the kind of blanket allocations, in terms of the funding that we've set aside for COVID, for instance, where we are at the moment, those funds aren't earmarked for anything in specifically, although when we come to look at the revenue monitoring later, you'll see that there are costs, for instance, associated with the leisure service and the ongoing impact of COVID. And at the moment, we're proposing to draw those down from neighbourhood services, but certainly if we see increased costs across the council, particularly going into the winter, then it may be that we need to draw down on those reserves. In terms of the proposals going forward, we're not discussing the revenue medium-term financial plan at this committee, but you'll know that those figures are quite startling, and reserves will need to be part of the picture in terms of resolving that going forward as well. So certainly there'll be a full review of reserves that we would be utilising to help with the time lag of delivering savings as part of the balanced budget, and that piece of work will be carried out over the next few months. I think those are the main things. In terms of HRA, we haven't got the capital monitoring report coming to this committee. It has gone to Cabinet, and we'll be bringing the September monitoring to the next scrutiny committee, but with the August capital monitoring for noting. And at that point, you'll see that there is significant slippage on the housing capital programme already. At this point in the year, I think it's felt that it's been slipped to a realistic level, and as such, the borrowing has been reduced to £1 million. I think we're expecting that there to be no borrowing in this financial year. But in terms of that drawdown of reserves, obviously, if the capital programme is to slip further, that drawdown from reserves will be hit. So reducing the reserves relies on us delivering the remainder of the capital programme.
I think you're on mute, Chair.
Oh, I have to do it. Sorry, everybody. So I'll repeat myself. So has anybody else got any questions now for Gemma on the review of the end of year position? No. So can we note the contents of this report?
Chair.
Sorry, Chair. I
No,
believe
can see
Councillor
everything.
Carroll's put his hand up.
Councillor Carroll, go for it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, for the report. It was just a question regarding the adverse variance on the ICT budget. I note in the revenue monitoring report there's a similar use of reserves in that report as well. Just wanted to ask what the overspend was in relation to.
We're currently utilising the ICT budget to support the implementation of a new Oracle system.
So
which
that is
supports-
Oracle, is it, as stipulated in the report?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Anybody else? Before we move on? Okay, that's great. So can we note the contents of this report, and can I have a hand to move? Thank you, Councillor Lovelock, and also somebody to second it. Anybody?
I believe Councillor Carroll is, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Thank you again. Thank you. Right, so we will now move on to agenda item number 6. And this one is the capital closure of accounts 2022. Again, this was heard at Cabinet on the 21st of July. So it's been referred to us for noting again the end of year capital position. So Gemma, over to you again, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Capital expenditure for 21-22 total 66.4 million against a planned programme of 79.821 million, but obviously we slipped sums throughout the year, so prior to this, resulting in a variance of 13.4 million. Of this, 11.496 million had been brought forward into the 22-23 capital programme with approval via the Chief Executive's emergency powers. A number of schemes have been subject to delay during the financial year due to the current economic climate, so retendering on schemes due to the cost of materials and labour, and and contractor negotiations. Sourcing materials has also been difficult with long lead times, and that's also impacted on the capital programme's progress. There were over 50 grant awards on the capital programme in 21-22, so lots of additional funding available in year, but quite challenging in terms of complying with all those various terms and conditions. Capital expenditure in year was sufficient to cover the full allocation of the supported borrowing, but there was a carry forward against the general capital grant of 539,000. We drew down 1.191 million from reserves to fund the capital programme, and that was significantly less than we'd planned due to the number of great late grants at year end, which required displacement. So we switched the funding around to fund them from these grant funding to then enable us to ring fence those sums in our reserves to deliver those grant schemes in the next financial year. 4.6 million of capital receipts were received, and the capital receipts balance at the 31st of March was 16.2 million. Some of the major spend delivered in year were, as you would expect, around the Council's Sustainable Communities for Learning programmes. That was just over 30 million. We spent just over 600,000 on the Council's residential homes, 1.89 million on the vehicle replacement programmes. That included 12 electric vehicles, over 2 million on resurfacing, and the construction of a new waste transfer station. Also significant spend took place in the financial year. The housing improvement programme spent 5.57 million on building new homes for the community. Happy to take any questions on this report.
Gemma, anybody have any questions on this one for the review of the year-end position with the capital closure of accounts? No? Oh, I can see a hand. Yes, Councillor Franks, please.
Sorry, I always find it difficult to locate the yellow hand. I'm now shrinking the screen. I appreciate this was the last financial year, and I might not have got the right end of the stick, but I'm looking at page 3. Which gives the breakdown by directorate of spend. And am I right in saying that the programme for 21-2 was 79 million? We actually spent 66, so therefore there was 11 million slippage. Is that? Am I understanding? We underspent by 11 million. Is that correct?
We underspent by 13 million, but we slipped, I think it was just under 12 million into the next financial year via that emergency power. So not all of the underspend was slipped into the next financial year.
All right, but in my simple terms, according to page 3, we underspent by 11 million, which will presumably be underway. The spend will be underway this financial year.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So those schemes have been reprofiled into this financial year and should be progressed in year, unless it's reported otherwise to committee.
Yeah, sure. It does seem a very high percentage of slippage. 11 million on 79 million is quite a significant sum. It's about 15%, I suppose, or a little bit more. Is this what usually happens? Because it's an awful lot of money that we fail to spend, and when we're screaming for resources, it is of concern to me. I wonder if you could comment, Gemma.
Yeah, I mean, a slippage is an ongoing battle from the capital accountant's point of view. I mean, I think certainly where we've got very large schemes like the Sustainable Communities for Learning schemes, sometimes those schemes the profile isn't 100% accurate, but there's such significant sums that it can be that we end up with some slippage into the new financial year. And sometimes it's around weather conditions. It can be for, you know, a really broad range of reasons, and just simply down to not having the goods delivered on time, or the, you know, the having completed the valuation to as much as was projected. So I think the profiles, people try to get the profiles right, but there is an inevitable kind of sense of optimism about the delivery of schemes sometimes that can impact as well as all those other conditions that I've raised. So it's something that we ask questions about at every monitoring meeting, and we work quite hard when we were initially putting budgets into the programme to make sure that we have realistic profiles, because it might be that, you know, if we had a realistic profile, that because we receive our capital grant funding on a yearly basis, that we can better afford some of those schemes over a longer period of time. So it's something that we're trying to get better at, but continue to have work to do, I think, in that area.
Okay, and looking at the individual categories, the underspend on the public sector housing is, would I be right in saying something in the order of 40%, which seems a huge amount of money, especially considering the lack of social housing in the Vale, the astonishingly great demand for such housing, and yet we've got £4 million that we didn't apply. Now, that's an awful lot of homes and an awful lot of families that we have the resources for, but we're not doing very much with it.
Chair, if I could just respond to that. I mean, I think those homes are going to be delivered. These sums predominantly relate to the new build schemes. It's obviously a very challenging economic environment to deliver some of those schemes at the moment. So those new build schemes are progressing in this financial year, and they will be delivered. It's just that the timeline for delivering some of those schemes has slipped in the context of those challenging conditions.
Well,
Thank you,
it might well be challenging, but when I look around the area, houses are going up left, right and centre, being delivered by the likes of Barrett's and similar companies. There are other companies available. They don't seem to be slipping. They seem to be motoring full steam ahead. Why are we different?
Sorry to intervene, Councillor Banks, because you're absolutely right. We do have to get as many homes built as possible. But from a finance perspective, I think this is an operational question. It's probably not one that Gemma is in a position to answer. It's to do with the finance and the end of year report that we were looking at today. Though obviously you are completely right in our objective to try and build as much as we can. I'm just thinking that possibly this isn't the right question to put to Gemma as to why they haven't been built, if that's okay.
Okay, well, I never want to be unfair to Gemma, so
No.
I'll take your advice.
It's a remit of skill probably to hurry up on the building of the homes. That's all.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay? Thank you ever so much. Can we move on? I think the next hand was Councillor Lovelock Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Gemma, it's just a point of clarification, and it goes back to this question of the variance and the slippage. Do I understand correctly that a number of grants that we were successful in bidding for actually came late into the pot. So the money is going to be moved forward to this financial year, which would perhaps alleviate some of the pain that Councillor Franks feels at the moment in terms of the slippage. Would that be a fair assumption of where that money has has caused us some slippage?
I think certainly where we have additional funding to spend in year, then that's certainly there's more schemes delivered within the capital programme, so that certainly has an impact. And certainly a lot of the funding that we have received through grants, we're very grateful for. It alleviates significant pressures. So, for instance, the additional asset maintenance funding for schools and the additional funding to improve facilities for free school meals. So I think we're certainly grateful for all the funding we receive. There's certainly issues around delivery of those additional schemes. So
thank you, Gemma. Thanks.
So much, Gemma. I think then the next hand was Councillor Goodjohn.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to point out to Councillor Franks that there's full details of the majority of spending further down on the list. And there's a variety of reasons. We have to remember that there was a major labour shortage at the time, which contributed massively to slippage, as it says in the report, and also to land acquisition, which the council can't really control when that occurs a lot of the time, because it's down to the people who own the land. I would also note that this is what we're mentioning, a fair and accurate record of what occurred and not what we should or should not be doing, which is probably what we're going to be considering in the future with the financial plan. And I'm glad that Clyde are now in favour of us building more houses.
Thank you so much, Councillor Goodjohn. And I think we've also got Councillor Liz Burnett. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as responsible cabinet member, I just make a couple of comments. I mean, slippage, as an experienced councillor Franks would be aware that we always have slippage. Quite often, in terms of education, the slippage is just literally linked to whether or not we can get something into the Easter holidays or whether it has to go into the summer holidays, and that continues. I think in terms of performance, delivering 5 brand new schools in a year, pretty spectacular. In when we were going into 2021-22, and an awful lot of that was delivered through a pandemic. So a lot of planning, and hats off to our officers in that. In terms of homes, I've just been to visit the new development in Hayes Road. They are stunning. The next one is now on site at Hayswood Road, and there's planning permission for ones up in Home View. Sometimes there are issues with planning permission, and that can hold up developments. And also, we now these days have to deal with sustainable drainage, which can cause glitches, can cause delays in that sort of thing. And you know, as members would be aware, things like the new household waste and recycling centre, you know, there are different things to do with that. But last week we took the capital strategy to Cabinet, and so if members would like to have a look at that, but this is a new report that goes into all of that. So looking forward, if members want to have a look at the capital strategy, that lays out all the sorts of things that we're dealing with. I suppose the only thing to basically end up with on that is, if we don't put things in, then we're not being as ambitious as we want to. Now, we know there's difficult times ahead, and we know that we will be struggling to deliver everything that we would want to. But as Gemma said, we are working hard to keep a close watch on slippage, to work out why slippage occurs and to minimise that. But to always play safe and say, well, we can't say that we're going to do that because there might be slippage, means that we're not going to be developing as fast as we could. But as I said, the capital strategy, an excellent report. So I would advise or suggest members read that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And that interjection. And now we have Councillor Johnson, please, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to make a couple of just very brief comments, because again, this is a a historical document. One of the major slippages we have is the new Yscol Sant Barrack, which is being built sort of on the outskirts of my ward. Unfortunately, I understand that's slid again, but will hopefully be delivered by the end of this financial year or the very start of next year. But that's a major slippage here, and it is slipping further. I just wanted to make the point that there's a on the Managing Director on Resources, there's a variance, it says here, of 2.1 million, and then the major variances outlined below only make around 400,000. So there's not really actually huge detail at the start of the report where you might be expecting to have some of that. If you're only explaining 400,000 out of 2 million, maybe there's been more information that needs to be put there right at the top. Also, the conversation, as we've just had, has been around the inevitability of slippage, and that sort of there is an optimism bias and there's an ambition bias that feeds into that. I think from a scrutiny perspective, what might be helpful is understanding what is an appropriate level of slippage that we might anticipate. What are the factors that really are relating to us as a local authority, and what are those factors that are more general and are being felt by all local authorities? It's not something for this report, obviously, but maybe in future it might be worth considering if there's comparable data across similar sized local authorities or similar demographic local authorities that could give us an indication as to whether or not we are performing according to how we should be benchmarked. Because I think that would put my mind at rest, and hopefully Councillor Franks as well, that we are performing as well as we can be, and not just sort of presenting a report and then saying, oh, here are the excuses. I think we need to know what is an appropriate level of slippage so that we can then sort of be able to draw comparisons with others and understand whether we are performing well and whether there's things that need to be reprofiled or reworked within our systems to do that better in future. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, it would be interesting to see if we are in the same sort of boat as other local authorities with slippage of major schemes. I would say we probably are, from my own local authority that I work in, and I know the struggles of having schemes finish on time. It really is an unprecedented time, and we keep saying that, but it really is. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any easier either, does it? Anyway, so are there any other questions about this end of year report? No? That's brilliant. Can we note the content then of this, and can we have a hand to move? Yes, Councillor. Oh, I've got three. So Councillor Drake and also a seconder. Councillor Goodjohn, that would be brilliant. Lovely. So let's move on to agenda item 7, which is the Welsh Language Standards Annual Monitoring Report for 2022. This report went to Cabinet on the 21st of July. They considered the report and resolved that it should be approved in principle, subject to our scrutiny consideration. So we now have Tom, who is going to give us a little bit more detail on this report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is another reference from Cabinet in July. As part of the Welsh Language Standards legislation, we're required to produce an annual report, and that's to do two things. So that's the reason for your two appendices to the reference. So the first appendix is the annual report, and what that does is provide an update on the 174 standards that are applicable to the local authority in terms of our monitoring and commentary on progress to achieving them. It sets out some contextual information in terms of what's been achieved, particularly within the year in areas such as communications, access to services, our translation services, and training for council staff. Section 3 of Appendix A makes reference to the individual standards across the 5 years in terms of how we've gone about implementing them and the current status of implementation. And then finally, within that appendix, the Welsh Language Commissioner asks us to report certain quantitative information, and that appendix, it contains that information as well. The standards, as committee will be aware, require the council to publish a 5-year strategy for promoting the use of the Welsh language. The Appendix B to this report is the 5th year of the previous 5-year promotion strategy. There are lots of P's in that, so this is the final year of the previous promotion strategy. Cabinet and committees have considered the 2022 to 27 strategy, which is now underway. So this is another kind of historical report. So Appendix B simply sets out against each of the commitments in the previous promotion strategy the work that had been done across the 5 years to implement it. I wanted to draw committee's attention to some of the discussion around the promotion strategy and its reporting that we had when adopting the current 5-year promotion strategy, and there was a request for some information in terms of monitoring our achievements against the commitments in that strategy, but also to include some more richer content. So talking about case studies, showcasing people with lived experience alongside some of those more sort of traditional performance management approaches to reporting, and that will be reflected in next year's update to committee. So this is being brought to your committee. It also went to Learning and Culture Committee for any comments, and we have published an interim version of this on the website in order to comply with our duties under the Act.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have any questions for Tom from members? Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you again, Chair. Sorry for butting in repeatedly here tonight. Thank you, Tom, for bringing the report. Obviously, as you say, this is a sort of a slightly historical report again, and even more historically because obviously the new promotion strategy is being started soon. I think I'm not sure if that's in the one of the exception reports later on, but I think that as Tom said, the new promotion strategy came to this committee on at least 2 occasions for discussion within the last year. So it has been discussed in some detail. I think the concerns that I and others raised were around the sort of slightly tick box nature of how it's been previously presented to us. And I think that what would be helpful is not just the I'm not quite sure lived experience is the right way of describing, how I engage with the council, but both the two flip sides that are required in future are the case studies. So seeing how people from our employees who have taken up offers of learning Welsh, etc., how they have developed, used and utilised those skills. And the flip side of that is really around the user experience of people in the Vale and how they find that the council uses Welsh with them or is able to. Because I think in my experience, people generally have fairly low assumptions of the council's ability to engage with them in Welsh beyond sort of the very basic sort of interfaces. Just in terms of the reports, 2 quick points. One is that I think it's said in here that our social media channels are bilingual. I think what's actually the case, certainly on Twitter, is that there are 2 separate accounts which tweet things in English or in Welsh. So they're not a bilingual account. They are 2 separate accounts, one which delivers in English, one which delivers in Welsh. and the other is in terms of recruitment. And one of the issues that was raised a couple of years ago, perhaps before Tom was in his present role, was about the relationship between the council and particularly Ysgol Bro Morgannwg in terms of recruitment of bilingual members of staff for Contact One there and things like that. I don't know if there's any work that's been done on that recently, but obviously there is a pool of bilinguals within Barry, within the wider Vale, who are hopefully able to take up some of those roles. And we just know if we've actually been engaging with the school on that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And yes, absolutely, you are right. Our social media channels are operated in both languages, but as separate accounts. We tend to find that that has a kind of better user experience in terms of best practice in operating those. But I take the point that they're not bilingual, they're offered in both languages, and it's an important distinction. Colleagues in Contact One Vale have been in discussions with Ysgol Bro about recruiting into the contact centre, and I'm also conscious that there's opportunities for us to do that slightly more broadly as well. We are committed to increasing the number of Welsh speaking staff as part of the promotion strategy, so it's something that I'll certainly share with my colleagues in HR and ask them to take forward and reflect, as you suggest, in the future updates to committee.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for the report. It's just a question about the translation agreement with Cardiff Council. Do you have figures for the cost of that service? I would just be interested to know how much it costs the authority vis-a-vis either doing it in-house or maybe using a third-party provider.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I don't have the figures to hand this evening, but I can certainly find those for you. That's not a problem at all. And just for members' information, the service for translation was tendered within the last couple of years. It went through a competitive process in order to award that contract, given obviously its scale, and that involved. As I was part of the evaluation panel for awarding that contract, and that involved both public sector and private sector operators. But I can certainly get some more information.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? Can I just check with you, Tom, as it is a historical report, is it possible for that slight amendment to be made as Councillor Johnson has suggested, so that it's clear that the social media isn't bilingual? There are two different, there's a Welsh and an English version, just in case we could be accused of slightly misleading. I mean, it's still great, but that they are two separate sites.
Absolutely.
Would be appropriate, yes?
I think that's perfectly possible, Chair. We've published the report as a kind of interim draft in order to comply. Wanted to bring it through the scrutiny process, though. So absolutely, I think if committee were minded to make that clarification back to Cabinet, we could certainly reflect that.
That's great. We just want to be completely clear so they know exactly what it is and won't be disappointed if they think it should be able to suddenly convert. Anybody else with any other questions? No? Okay, so we have a recommendation for Cabinet then that there is that amendment, as we just discussed, that the social media channels are not bilingual, but they're separate. There's one English and there's one Welsh. So other than that, can we now endorse this report, please? Can I have a hand from anybody so we can move?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Drake. And can we have a seconder?
For God's sake.
I'll second that.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Councillor Mudd. Brilliant. So let's move then swiftly on to agenda item 8. So this is the draft Vale of Glam annual self-assessment 2021-2022. Now, Cabinet considered this report on the 8th of September. They've made a couple of minor amendments to timelines for the engagement activity within that executive summary. They've endorsed and they've referred the report to us for consultation. They are seeking our views and recommendations. Now, this is wide for changes to the judgments and or proposed actions. These are the areas for future focus. And it's been referred back to Cabinet for their final report. And then it will then find its way to Governance and Audit Committee and presented for endorsement by full council. So, Tom, this is over to you again. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm sorry that the committee are going to have to hear my voice lots this evening. With your permission, Chair, I've got a dozen slides to run through. This was one of the requests of elected members in one of those working groups that we had just before the recess about how to present this. So I'll just share my screen a moment. And can I just check that you can see that, Chair?
Yes, I can. That's great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. So this is being referred to your scrutiny along with all other scrutiny committees. It also has been to Governance and Audit Committee as part of the initial draft of the self-assessment. And the background to this is, as we were referring to as part of the performance calendar item earlier on your agenda, Chair, introduced as part of the Local Government and Elections Act in 2021, and the Part 6 of that Act relates to new performance requirements, and they require us to keep performance under review, to consult on our performance, and to report on our performance through self-assessment, and that's what this report is seeking to do. The last couple of bullet points on that slide just give some further context that a panel assessment for peer review needs to happen at least once during an election cycle. That will be determined in terms of timing by the Council's Cabinet, and we also then have a duty to respond to that panel performance assessment as well. But the self-assessment is a product of the first of the three on your screen. And the purpose of this is to give us an opportunity to reflect based on evidence and outcome-focused performance in order to challenge ourselves to continuously improve. And as I referred to earlier on this evening, Chair, we have to do a number of things as part of that process. So we're required to demonstrate how well are we doing things in terms of exercising our functions effectively. The Act also introduces a requirement to demonstrate the provision of value for money. So are we using our resources economically, efficiently and effectively? Reflecting on how well are we run in terms of governance, but then importantly, as part of self-assessment, obviously identifying what and how can we do better. And the next slide, which my colleagues in corporate performance think is a simple diagram of the performance arrangements, but it's a little bit detailed, but what it does show on the left-hand side of your screen is how all of this fits together, and we were discussing this as part of the performance calendar. And I suppose what we're demonstrating here is that we have a 5-year corporate plan that runs until 2025, and every year, as you're aware, we publish an annual delivery plan. Underpinning all of that activity is a range of integrated planning work, things like our digital strategy, the work that Gemma was just describing in terms of our annual budgeting, corporate asset management, customer relations, public participation. So corporate activity that supports the delivery of our annual plan. And all of that is articulated in the service plans that later on this evening you'll have your annual delivery plan quarterly monitoring report on. And as an important part of that cycle then is a pause at the end of the year to assess ourselves. I mentioned we've done this for a number of years under previous legislation. This year we're required to reflect that value for money piece into this work as well. We then engage and consult on that, and it will inform, importantly, as part of the areas for future development, next year's annual delivery plan. On the right-hand side of the screen is just showing the steps that we're going through in terms of building this self-assessment. We've undertaken self-assessments at a directorate level, so 5 self-assessments were completed. We then undertook a process of internal peer challenge. So the Director of Learning and Skills, for example, challenged myself on the self-assessment that I produced with my management team, and that was done in audience with the Chief Exec, the relevant cabinet members, and scrutiny chairs. And then we moderated the findings across the 5 in order to aggregate them up to a corporate level self-assessment. And just before the recess, we brought the end of year performance to committee. So we added the performance information alongside that. And that, alongside the findings of the Directorate Self-Assessment, informed the annual governance statement, so making a link with the way that governance is reported. And we're now bringing the draft annual self-assessment report to your committee. It's recently concluded its consultation with the public, partners and the trade unions. And it's important that we go through this process in order to double check the findings that we're and conclusions that we're drawing in terms of judgments. As you mentioned, Chair, it'll then go on to Governance and Audit Committee, Cabinet and then full council. I think it's important that I give you the context of reaching the performance ratings and judgments. So we've assessed ourselves as green against the delivery of the 2021-22 annual delivery plan. And that's because over 85% of the commitments that we made within that plan were delivered. And also you'll see in the report itself that it's structured around the themes that we've set out in our current annual delivery plan, Project Zero, responding to the cost of living crisis, providing care and support, etc. And we've successfully again delivered against the majority of those commitments, and they do represent some of our most significant challenges for the foreseeable future. And then from a use of resources perspective, again, the context here for the overall rating of good in terms of how we're using our resources, whether that's people, assets, finance, etc., is that we can demonstrate that we've used our resources in a way that puts us in a position where we can improve performance and secure improvement for the future. And that's been done in the context of delivering those annual delivery plan commitments and a backdrop of increased demand and significant resource challenge. We've used the Sustainable Development Principle and the 5 ways of working as part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in order to self-assess ourselves. And we can see that we are embedding that approach in how we go about working. And we can demonstrate robust mechanisms in place that demonstrate that we are using resources economically, efficiently, effectively, and importantly, equitably. And in terms of the head of internal audits judgment of reasonable insurance, that gives us again some assurance around the governance aspects of where we're reaching these judgments. Committee will have seen this slide previously in terms of end of year performance. The overall performance at the end of the 2021-22 annual delivery plan was green. The actions that were delivered were predominantly green across all 4 objectives, and the performance measures were amber or green, which gave an overall rating of green across the annual delivery plan. And this slide just shows that, but expressed rather than by well-being objective, but by those 6 themes that the report is structured around that I mentioned a little earlier. The Directorate self-assessments, as I mentioned, reflected on the use of resources to support continuous improvement prospects into the future. And we asked questions structured around the Future Generations Act's 5 ways of working, around assets, people, finance, the management of risk and performance, and also how we're using our engagement insight. And we judge ourselves to be good in how we are going about managing those. Those judgments, as shown on the screen, are subject to consultation findings, and that's the piece of work, Chair, that is currently underway to reflect on the consultation process and findings from there. And this slide reflects the governance and internal controls effectiveness, showing extracts from the annual governance statement about reasonable assurance being given as an opinion from internal audit colleagues. The most important thing, I suppose, as part of the self-assessment report is what it tells us about what we need to focus in on next, and areas of focus. And over the next couple of slides, I've got some extracts from the self-assessment report itself that's in your pack this evening, Chair, just showing some examples of the kinds of things that the assessment is identifying that we need to focus on across the local authority in the coming year. You'll see references to workforce skill, diversity, mental health, recruitment and retention challenges, some of the major big ticket items around Project Zero, looking at how we use our assets, whether that's in the community or for the operation of council services, investment in digital technology, commitments around delivering our public participation strategy, how we use grant funding. So this is a really wide-ranging set of findings which we're now making sense of, reflecting on, and looking at how they can inform next year's annual delivery plan. And these are all contained in the pack that members have had. This slide just shows some examples as well that are specifically within the remit of your committee, Chair. Many of these are the same as they were on the previous slide around some of the workforce issues and the use of our assets, but also references to changes to our procurement policy, the development of an investment strategy, and again, the importance of that medium-term financial plan, which Cabinet considered this month as well. So the final slide that I've got for you this evening just shows how the whole process kind of fits together. So we've reflected on our annual delivery plan themes, and we've gone out to ask what people make of our views of our performance, asked them what we could have done differently. We've proposed some of the ideas that we want to focus on in the future and asked for opinion as to whether people feel that they're the right things. And then just finally, Councillor Johnson asked earlier about dovetailing existing duties, and one of those, an example of that is that we need to test our wellbeing objectives for their relevance every year as part of the Future Generations Act. So we've also reflected that in the consultation. Once that's completed and this report makes its way finally to full council on, I think, the 9th of November, we will then extract the areas for improvement and start to construct next year's annual delivery plan, and work has commenced on that with the council's cabinet now. So that's a really brief overview of what I know is a detailed report, but I hope that was useful for committee.
Great, thank you, Tom. There is a lot of detail. You are absolutely right. So I'm wondering if anybody here has any comments or questions for Tom. Anybody? Yeah. So we've got Councillor Johnson. Would you like to?
Does Councillor Goodjohn want to go first? And just as I've been speaking first on those items.
You flashed at just about the same time. So yes, Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I just wanted to make some observations based on section 5.2, our year in numbers. So it states that we were unable to get national benchmarking data, which I believe you've mentioned before in previous reports from Data Cymru. I'm just wondering how that's affected the production of this report, because obviously without benchmarking data, as we've had a lot previously, it's really hard to know how we're doing. I also wanted to add, I think I best put these all into one for you, Tom, is to Wellbeing Objective 1, with the main numbers that we give. 3 of the different numbers are 16, 17 and 18-year-old respectively school leavers that go into being NEETs, not being in education, training or employment. I just wondered if it's right to put 3 different numbers into that, because that's putting a lot of importance into 3 numbers that are very interlinked. If there's a high number at 16, there's probably going to be a high number at 17 and 18 as well, and that affects going year to year, if you know what I mean. And finally, I did note here on Wellbeing Objective 4 that an additional 29,296 meters squared had been sown with wildflowers, which says is improving on last year's figure of 245,000. I just wonder if that might be a typo you might want to fix.
More on top of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Good, John. I was just noting the questions down. So, absolutely, the benchmarking information is an interesting point, because there has been a move away from publishing some of that data, as you say, via data cymru. We do have available some information that we can benchmark against, but we also look then for proxy measures where we can do and build that into the framework for performance reporting. With your permission, Chair, I'll ask the question around the needs and Councillor Goodjohn's observation on objective one. It's not an area of the organisation that I feel that I can give you a proper answer this evening. And thank you for spotting that a decimal point has gone in the wrong place on the wildflower rewilding. I'll get that double checked. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question I've just thought of. I wonder if there's anything you can do with the National Survey for Wales, which comes out every year, that may improve with benchmarking, and particularly because it involves noting how well residents believe that we are doing as our perception of how well we are doing, which I think sometimes can very much differ from how we believe we are doing with our services for residents, especially as we're working with other communities. I'm unsure of the logistics of that, but I just wondered.
Absolutely, Councillor Goodjohn. We do actually use metrics from the National Survey for other pieces of work, and there's certainly opportunity to do that. I've also asked colleagues within the performance and consultation teams to develop some proposals for undertaking a revised public opinion survey for the authority in 2023. That's a representative sample of people and their views, and that I think would also contribute to providing us that kind of evidence that you were talking about.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you both. Councillor Johnson, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tom. I think as far as this goes as a draft, I quite like, I think, the areas that are under sort of item 7. So that's where we're at the end of the report, where it's focused on what we are going to do next. I appreciate that one of the challenges with this report being brought us in draft form is that a lot of the detail and the challenge material isn't really available yet in order to show to us that this is what's going on. But I think so. I find that the stuff at the end, like I say, that chapter 7, which focuses on whether it's the listing of the achievements, the challenges, risks, opportunities, and the areas of future focus. I find that more useful, for me as a councillor. Because that's a short and sharp sort of appreciation of where we are. Where I worry, and this is part of my question about the dovetailing earlier, is that it's very possible to produce lengthy documents that don't always tell us very much. And when you're on balance, we've looked at everything, we decided we're good. Is that really sort of the what we want to get out of this? So that area, I think the area at 7, I think is more important for me as a councillor. In terms of this is where we are, this is where we're going. I've just got a couple of queries, sort of about that data earlier on, because it's a lot of examples and explaining. There's an awful lot of sort of percentages and here's some numbers, and I'm not sure that not sure whether I get anything from that says the council is doing well. The one that stuck out was that 70% of scrutiny committee recommendations have been improved, up from 39% last year. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure whether that works. So a lot of those numbers there, do feel that they whether they are or not, they feel that they could be cherry picked, and I'm not sure what they're telling us when they're there on their own. So it takes one day to do some tidying up some fly tipping compared to 0.92 days before. I'm not sure that necessarily on its own kind of sort of explains these things. So I'm not sure sort of kind of quite where to go with that. There's a lot of numbers and I don't necessarily understand what they're telling us into that. So I've been interested to see the feedback from people external to the council as to whether those are useful things for them. I think just to come back quickly on Councillor Goodjohn's points about the parks open spaces, I think if I'm reading it correctly, and again this is the issue with maybe some of the how things are written, it's an additional 29,000 metres squared have been added to the existing 245,000 metres squared. So that's how I'm reading anyway. So it was 245,000 before, it's now about 275,000 metres squared. So great. Again, I don't know what 29,000 square metres looks like. So I don't know how many football pitches that is or whatever it makes it meaningful for me. Similarly, I think I spotted Councillor Lovelegge was talking about some of the jargon. I think in some of the schools bit there's something which talks about ALN resource bases. If you don't know what that means, then it's not going to be clear. And last but not least, I'd like to congratulate us on getting the £14 million for a marina in here. That's been very quiet in the outside world, but I don't know whether there's any other dummy things in here that have not yet happened that maybe need to be proofread, because I have had members of my group, obviously they probably raised it in other scrutiny meetings saying how excited they are to have this happen, but they haven't been told about it. So I think it's just a proofread on that, especially, and particularly maybe in future, given these are published documents that people could be reading and misunderstanding. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
I'm sure that there wouldn't be public domain going in here, but let's double check. And the bit about the scrutiny committee, before I hand back to Tom, to me, that means that we are listening to ourselves. That's how I see that. And a massive increase in scrutiny referrals being considered shows me that we are actually listening. But that's, as you said, Councillor Johnson, some of this is open to interpretation, isn't it? And one person may read something and see something very differently. But yeah, so back to you, Tom. Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I take the point in terms of the presentation of those percentages, the kind of year in numbers piece, and they're extracted from some of the measures that we report as part of the quarterly reporting framework. And it's always it is interesting when we come to target setting in the early part of the calendar year, isn't it? When we're trying to identify certain measures or proxy indicators for progress on delivering big wellbeing outcome based pieces of work. I was trying to work out how many football pitches that was, but I wasn't going to be able to do it with any certainty. But I think the point that you make is a really good one, though, because it's about making that data meaningful to people so that they can visualise and see impact. You are right that other councillors have picked up the incorrect phrasing related to the Barry Marina proposals, and that work is being corrected. Apologies that my colleagues conflated the two sources of funding and where we were in the processes for both. But in the next iteration of that report, it'll be made very clear where we are with both sets of that Westminster funding. Oh, I think you're on mute, Chair.
Yeah.
Second time tonight. Sorry, everybody. Anyone else with any other comments? No?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's brilliant. So just to go back to where we were with this one. So do we have recommendations for changes to the judgments? I don't think anybody has commented on that. So if that's not the case, we'll go to recommendations for changes to the proposed actions or areas for future focus. Was there anything there? I don't think we did. Okay, so can we look back then just to review some of the language in that report, Tom? I think you've said that there's already been comments from other scrutiny committees on jargon. So if we can revisit some of that, that would be really good. especially with reference to the ALN. Maybe just have another look at that at football pitch, additional 26,000, whatever it is, or is it just so that it's really clear, because we've seen that slightly differently, haven't we? And then I think there was also a comment made by Councillor Goodjohn on the classification of NEETs and whether, you know, if NEETs is 14 to 18-year-olds, then I suppose it would be appropriate to have 16, 17 and 18-year-olds in there. But if you could do that bit of work as well. Was there any other recommendations for any sort of amendment? I don't think there was there? Nope, that's great. So can we move on this one now? Can I have a hand from somebody, please? Oh no, hang on, Tom's come back.
Just for Councillor Johnson, it was approximately just over an additional 4 football pitches worth of rewilding.
Thank you, Tom.
I think that's brilliant. That's lots of wildflowers. Wonderful. Okay then, so can we now move on this? Has somebody put their hand up? Anybody? Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and also a seconder. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Let's move on to agenda item 9. We're getting there, everybody. So this is revenue monitoring for the period the 1st of April to the 31st of August 2022. Recommendations here are that the position with regards to the authority's 2022-23 revenue budget be noted, and that the arrangements to offset the emerging overspend also be noted. And we've got Gemma back with us now to give us a little bit of an overview. Thank you, Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much. So in terms of the revenue monitoring to the end of August, I think the emerging pressures are very much what you'd expect to see, really. So in terms of the recent pay award proposal that is reflected in these figures, general inflation, particularly in areas such as school transport. We're also seeing staffing pressures, and inflationary and demand pressures are being experienced across services and will need to be carefully monitored during the financial year. We have, as I say, included the figures for the current pay award proposal within the monitoring projections, and we have in the main been able to offset those by the forecast underspend in the policy budget. There's a small drawdown from the pay pressures reserve to offset those additional costs. Work will need to continue as we progress through the year to mitigate the school transport overspend. There's a balance of 646,000 that isn't able to be offset within the service at the moment. In terms of the COVID funding, the majority of those schemes are coming to an end now. The council continues to make payments for under the Ukrainian scheme, under the discretionary cost of living schemes, and it's also starting to make payments now under the carers grant and the winter fuel payments. In terms of that pay offer, we budgeted a figure of around 3%, and the current pay offer is in the region of 6 to 7%. So a significant increase over and above the figure that had been budgeted for. In terms of schools, it's estimated that the cost of the collective agreement pay award and teaching would be around 2.84 million. And it's currently proposed that those costs would need to be met from within school balances in year. Just to pick up some of the other overspends within the monitoring, in social services, we have an total overspend of 1.35 million, but 600,000 of that's associated with the pay offer. The balance of the 750,000 will be funded by social services reserve, and that's made up of some continuing pressures in the children and young people services around legal costs and support for placements, some pressures around community care packages, although that budget is extremely volatile, and work will be ongoing there to assess a realistic year-end position. And we also have some additional pressures in year associated with running the council's residential homes. We're continuing to report a £500,000 overspent in leisure services associated with the fallout of that COVID funding and reduced customer numbers. And the resources projected outturn includes the additional Oracle implementation funding that was set out in the Cabinet report that went on the 29th of September. In policy, we have an underspend of 2 million against capital financing, and that's because the council continues to internally borrow and therefore saves on the cost of external borrowing. And we also have a small underspend of 250,000 against the council tax reduction scheme, and that will be used to fund a contribution to the Oracle scheme and also offset pay costs in year. There is a £500,000 target for efficiencies, and services are continuing to work to identify and deliver those savings. We have a new section in the monitoring report for reserves, and that includes the use of reserves for capital, planned use of reserves within revenue as part of projects or funding for temporary roles, for instance, and then also planned use of reserves to support emerging overspends. And then the treasury management elements of that report. The borrowing update shows that some small amounts of borrowing have taken place early in the year, but in all likelihood, in the current interest rate environment, we're expecting to really minimise that any additional borrowing as we progress through the financial year and maintain that internal borrowing position. But we need to keep the kind of market conditions and our levels of reserves under review as we progress through the year. In terms of investment, the council continues to invest its cash balances and is getting relatively good returns, so certainly significantly above what it's had in previous years. And there will be potentially some additional funding that we'll be able to report later in the year as a result of that. Okay, thank you very much.
Gemma, that's great, and it's a very challenging picture, isn't it? Councillor Woods, please.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Yeah, I took very interesting as a first-time reader of this report, and yes, it is a challenging time. But on page 4, if we look at corporate resources, there's a big discrepancy in the what we classify as resources. And I tried to read the report to work out exactly what that entails. If you could just explain, because we've gone from 983, is that pay awards or what is, or is that ICT? What has caused that big discrepancy there? You're on mute.
Apologies, I'm mute. Yes. So there is a significant overspend within resources in year that's associated with the delivery of the Oracle scheme. Right. So that's a significant sum, and then there also is an overspend associated with the pay award. But the majority of that sum is associated with Oracle. Right.
Okay. And that. Okay, has that been highlighted in previous reports? Just out of curiosity, because obviously I'm a new member and I'm just sort of a little taken aback that it's overshot by 2.8 million against 983,000 as it was accounted for at the beginning, or is that because another budget has moved? Has it been reallocated into what we call resources?
No. There is a significant overspend. It was reported in at the last cabinet in more detail. So there's a more detailed report that went to the 29th. Cabinet report. The scheme was originally intended to go live in December 2021. There's been significant delays due to the complexity of the payroll element in particular, and significant resources had to be brought in on the council side in order to provide the technical resource we needed to work with the person delivering the project and deliver the scheme. And we hope to go live in the coming months.
Okay, are those permanent employees who've been brought in or consultants in that case?
No, they're consultants.
Right. Okay. So okay. That's quite a big number. All right. Well, anyway, at least, yeah. I just saw resources as a number, and I was quite shocked to see quite a big rise like that. But it is an IT project, and hopefully it delivers what we hope it will. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, for the report. Just following on from Councillor Wood's line of questioning, actually, in relation to Oracle, are we expecting any further overspend on that? I mean, obviously, it's a project that to date has encountered difficulties and hasn't been rolled out as planned or expected. So are we now on course and not expecting any further outturns, or are we likely to come back in future months and find that that's moved on and those overspends are even higher?
The overspends will be linked to the delivery of Oracle. So we're working hard to deliver it to the programme. The payroll area of the project is particularly complex, and there are some issues that we are working with Oracle, particularly around absence and around how pensions are reported, that are very resource intensive and very challenging on a technical side for the implementer, ourselves and Oracle. And we are we've got the cost of any delays at the forefront of our mind when we are delivering the programme, and are trying very hard to make sure that it delivers within the coming months. But if there are further delays, there would be additional costs associated with that. Yeah,
but I'm assuming once it's up and running, there will then be running costs associated with it, just as any prop. So it is basically just with the rollout that these costs are being incurred, and once that's secured, then you wouldn't expect there to be further problems down the line that could incur further costs.
We've Councillor Carroll, we've as part of the budget strategy report that's recently gone to Cabinet, and I think it's also referred to in the Oracle report. In fact, I know that it is. There is some external support that is referred to, and as part of that arrangement, any future problems would be addressed as part of that arrangement going forward.
Okay, thank you.
So that provides ongoing technical support to the council.
Thanks.
Councillor John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware again that, as I said previously, this is purely a report of what has occurred. However, I just want to mention once again that the efficiency targets that exist, particularly for corporate performance, seem to be significantly higher, in the hundreds of thousands higher than we're able to actually achieve. And I think I raised this, was it in June, that we seem to be underperforming our efficiency targets, and we need to make sure that we are not compensating for inflationary pressures or any other kind of pressures on our spending by making efficiency targets that we just can't keep in the future, because that's going to make huge problems down the line. Sorry, I'm aware that in the report it says that we are reviewing the target, so I just hope that we come to a figure that is a lot more reasonable for what we can actually achieve.
Chair, if I could just very briefly respond. I completely accept there is a historical issue within the resources service, particularly. Certainly, I think any future efficiencies would be linked to initiatives to identify specific changes rather than like a general blanket target figure, which I think to a certain extent is where this issue has arisen from.
Thank you. Yes, it was the same target last year, wasn't it? 500,000 as this year, but with the carryover. I suppose, you know, what would be concerning, and it is to me, is that there is very little narrative to indicate how they would even know how to attempt to achieve it. And I understand that it is a very difficult situation that we're in, but there's nothing to suggest that there is. So yeah, that really probably, as you suggested, does need to be looked at. and especially linked to initiatives, because if we just carry on doing what we've always done, we are not going to have a different result. Anyway, sorry. Councillor Johnson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the comments with regards to corporate savings, we went through a period between the austerity years, the turbocharged austerity years between around 2012 and 2017, where we set some multi-million pounds worth of savings. And what happened at the end of that period, if that's the right way of putting it, not that period completely ended, but we sort of actually, a lot of officers looked at their figures and said, look, we can't really deliver on this. This is not particularly useful. And around that time, there was the sort of a house building spurt, that started taking place, which led to an increase in our allocation from Welsh Government, which meant that those savings targets were no longer quite as prioritised as they had been between, say, 2012 and 2017. So I think there was a change in attitude, sort of towards those. So almost the question that I don't know, I don't want to put words in Councillor Goodjohn's mouth, but I think he's asking is, are those really being set, or are they just some numbers written on a page? If there aren't savings to be made that are comfortable and easy to be made, then I don't want us to be cutting into the bone on services when we should be making sure that they are delivered. That's by the by, it's a conversation that maybe others will want to have about the prioritisation of savings targets within our budget. But I wanted to sort of raise 3 different points here. Firstly, was on a process issue for Gemma. It's regarding that question earlier about the extra grants that we had coming in and where they're spent. I'm just interested in how those are being accounted for within our system for the current year, in terms of where that falls. And then there are 2 points there, which one has been covered already by accident by Councillor Wood and by design by Councillor Carroll, but I want to sort of press on it again with regards to Oracle and our role as a scrutiny committee. So there was an emergency report in April. There was a report that came to Cabinet a couple of weeks ago. If we're £2 million over budget on something that's got a £4 million budget, that surely deserves sort of a special item on a corporate performance agenda somewhere to look at what's happening and to understand, whether there are lessons to be learnt. What have we got right and what have we got wrong on it's a major project, sort of thing we only do every 15 years or so, and if there are lessons to be learnt from us about us and our management of large scale projects, then we have to be sort of looking at that quite closely. And similar notes, and it was touched upon in the introduction, is the leisure services contract. Now, I'm sure there have been a report recently to Healthy Living and Social Care on this, but if we're going to be expected to find £500,000 each year to maintain the service provision, then again, I think that this committee should be having sort of a better look at what's going on there. Because that £500,000 is the whole savings line that we've just talked about there. If that's something that's going to fall in our lap as we go forward, then I think similarly we need to sort of be taking a look at it from the perspective of this committee and not just from the Healthy Living and Social Care. So there's a question there for Gemma, and then there's a question I'm throwing open maybe to the chair. I don't know if you have any thoughts about whether sort of those 2 issues in particular should be brought back and considered, given a bit more in-depth discussion by this committee in future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just make a quick comment about the savings thing. I take on board comments of Scrutiny, and I think that when we talk about whether or not we're trimming fat or cutting to the bone, I think we're starting to amputate limbs, if I'm honest. And I think that it's a constructive thing to have a mindset of looking to see whether things can be done better. And so I think that's part of how we work more effectively. Whether or not putting a blanket £500,000 savings target in is, I don't know. I think that is something that I would put on the table for when we go into budget discussions in the coming months, to say, you know, how do we deliver effective public services? How do we ensure that we continue to look for more effective models, and how we can deliver particularly our statutory services effectively and at good quality. But I think that, you know, the days of scrutiny discussions when reports were brought over the budget, and it was the discussion was generally, no, we don't want X, Y, or Z cut, but there were no discussions about, well, what we would replace that with, are gone. And so I very much look forward to very in-depth discussions about where we go this year with our budget, and how we also support our staff who are delivering against, you know, in such difficult circumstances. So yeah, and any suggestions you want to make, that's fine, and we can go through all that when we get the when we have the budget reports in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. Just two separate points here, Gemma, but I think it probably makes more sense to ask them both together rather than come back. The first one is in relation to the increased energy costs, which is set out in paragraph 2.32 of the report. I note that you, in the report, make clear that you haven't yet factored the impacts of this into the budget outturn, and you've sort of then, or the author has then referred to potentially offsetting some of those increased costs by the less frequent usage of council properties. I was just wondering if there had been any attempt to quantify this yet. I appreciate it's not in the figures, but what private calculations have been made. And the second one, so the second point is in relation to the investment strategy. I was just interested to know, given the coverage in the national press of Thurrock Councillor, I know there have been issues with authorities lending them money, whether they were any of the authorities to which we had lent sums. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of Thurrock Council, no, we haven't invested any sums with them. And in terms of the energy costs, so as you may remember from last year's budget process, we purchased the majority of our energy needs for this financial year in advance. So I think 97% of our gas and 100% of our electricity. So the only pressure that we are reporting in here is around standing charges, which I think was the room for manoeuvre in that agreement. So which we think will be around 300,000. Now we aren't currently seeing an overspend, because that 300,000 so far is offset by reduced energy usage across the council. So we aren't currently reporting that. Now, this won't be the same picture in schools. So schools are also affected by standing charges, but they won't be benefiting from the reduced energy usage that the corporate centre is. So schools will be bearing that increased cost, and I will try and put a figure on that for a future monitoring report, so you're cited on the impact on schools. But certainly as at the centre, we aren't currently reporting an overspend or seeing an overspend as a result of these increased standing charges, because it's offset so far.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else, Scott? Hang on a minute.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I don't think Gemma had a chance to respond to my comments or questions about the how last year's grants were being reported in this year's cycle. Thanks.
Apologies. So in terms of there's a mix. So some of those grants were for capital purposes. So they are being delivered as part of the capital programme and will be reported as a capital scheme that is funded from a reserve contribution within the capital programme. And you'll receive the capital monitoring at the next scrutiny committee. In terms of the revenue scheme, so I think we talked about the discretionary cost of living scheme where we receive the funding in year. So that is being reported within the service that it's being delivered in. So that will be within resources, but because obviously the expenditure is offset by a planned drawdown from reserves. But Councillor Johnson, now you've asked me the question, I would need to go and confirm that it is being shown as a planned drawdown from reserves. So I will confirm that via email, and if not, I will correct it for the next monitoring. Yes, so they would all be reported as expenditure offset by income within the relevant service in year.
Sorry, Chair, just similarly, I don't know if you had any comments regarding my suggestion that we have items relating to Oracle and to the leisure contract come to this committee at some point in future. Obviously, there is the fact that there is a recent report on the Oracle means that obviously there's something that's already there that could be brought at fairly short notice.
It is a massive. Gemma's explained there's been delays and technical issues. Yeah, I would be interested in that. I think, though, that this particular meeting, we've just discussed the revenue monitoring that period. So if we take this this report and ask for more information on the Oracle project. Now, in terms of the leisure contract, what do you have in mind for that one, Councillor Johnson? What exactly do you want to see?
I think the situation regarding the leisure contract obviously started more than 10 years ago now, I think, and I know there's regular updates that go to, I think, the Healthy Living and Social Care Committee. I'm just trying to find the most recent one here because I don't think it was that long ago, but really it's more I was just I'm just starting to have a level of concern that that the drop in income and usage of the centres that had occurred during COVID is a permanent gap rather than a temporary gap, and implications of that for the way in which this is funded and organised in future. Because Welsh Government plugged that gap for a couple of years, but are no longer doing so in this financial year. If I'm saying this correctly, Gemma, that's a £500,000 gap that we're anticipating coming from our coffers this year. What is the plan? So I don't know if it's something that maybe Democratic Services can go away and see whether there's something that's useful for a timeline in the background for us based on what's already there, and have I would assume Dave Nevitt would be the appropriate officer, maybe, or whoever can be recommended, who can sort of just explain to us sort of what the situation is, so that we can look at it from that corporate performance and resources perspective.
I mean, yes, you can see there is a definite increase in the use from last year, and hopefully it's a trajectory that's going to be going that way, isn't it? But yeah, I see where you're coming from. Yes, let's have a look and see if there is more information to show, or really that they are concerned about it and they're going to try and do something to promote it more widely, because yeah, you don't want to be continuing to have to fund something, and also it's something that is so well, it should be used more often, shouldn't it, if things are looking a little bit ropey. Yeah, but yeah, can we do that too then? Would that be okay? Thank you. Okay, so do we have anything else that anybody wants to ask about this particular revenue monitoring period?
No, thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. So can we move to the next agenda item?
Oh, sorry, Chair, can I just double
Yeah.
check in terms of recommendations of the revenue report? Are we noting the recommendations, or are we adding on there about a further reporting around Oracle and the leisure centre?
Yeah. Can we take that out of this meeting though, Mark? Because I think that they're separate.
Sorry, Chair, I lost you then.
Can we take these as separate reports out of this meeting? Does that make sense to do that?
Yeah, so not in the actual recommendations of the revenue report, just something to be added onto the work programme.
Yeah,
So that's fine.
We'd like to look at that. And I think Councillor Carroll, he also wants to ask a question.
I was just going to come in and propose that recommendation, but if we're going to add it to the work programme, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind, I'm just conscious of the tongue-in-cheek comment we were discussing about, sort of recommendations and things like that to cabinet and things being accepted. I think if we're agreeing as a committee that we want more information on the Oracle overspend and the leisure contract, that's coming out directly as a result of the information that's provided in this report. So for me, it would actually make sense to have a recommendation that we receive a further report on the situation regarding Oracle, and B, the situation regarding the leisure contract. That makes sense to be including here because it's coming directly from the report. Does that make sense?
I'd be happy to second that.
Okay, do it that way. I don't really have any particular preference on it. I just think that the extra reports would be a good idea, and I'm concerned about the overspend, certainly with the project, just as you are. So, okay, is that helping to make that clear then, Mark? If we make a recommendation, then that these additional reports come back to us.
Yeah, that's fine. We can incorporate that into the recommendations, Chair. And in terms of the projected revenue outturn and inflationary pressures, our committee then happy to note those as well. Yeah. And then obviously we'll have the extra recommendation on those two areas of interest by the committee.
Lovely. Thank you very
much. Lovely. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Can we move on this now then?
Sorry, Chair, I can't hear you.
Yeah, sound went temporarily, Chair.
Yeah, my mic is definitely on. If I just,
can
you hear me now?
Yes,
better, Chair.
That's a lot better. That's a lot
yes,
better.
thanks, Chair.
I just have to hold my head. Okay. So can I have a hand to move, please?
Happy to move, Chair.
And a seconder.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Marvellous. So now we are moving on to agenda item number 10. Okay, this is the Public Service Board annual report. Again, this is another historical report, 2021 to 2022. This is year 4 of the 5-year plan. The report seeks to implement 4 wellbeing objectives, enabling residents to get involved, participate, and shape local services, reducing poverty and tackling inequalities linked to deprivation, giving children the best start in life, and 4th, to protect, enhance, and value our environment. So again, to give us a little bit more detail and background of some of this great work that's been done. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, this is the Public Services Board 4th annual report, year 4 of the 5-year plan. We're bringing it to your committee this evening, Chair, as the lead scrutiny committee for the work of the PSB. You've got a link in the committee report to the online report of the PSB, which sets out a little bit more detail in terms of the wellbeing objectives. And specifically within the last couple of years, we've worked with the PSB to focus in on 4 priority areas. So the Move More Eat Well plan, which public health colleagues are leading on, the Tackling Climate Change work, which is being jointly led by Natural Resources Wales and ourselves. There's a Pathfinder project around time banking, which is a Public Health Wales and Council Housing jointly delivered project, which also involves colleagues from Glamorgan Voluntary Services, and also that work around improving engagement, which we're doing as a complete partnership. The report is presented to the PSB obviously every year in order to both reflect on what has happened and importantly identify areas of focus for the future. The report does contain details of the evidence base, so there's lots of information there in terms of demographics, there's information relating to travel, commuting and health information which helps shape and focus the work of the PSB. And then there's a series of case studies included within the report, focusing in on the kind of mechanics of the PSB in terms of the wellbeing assessment, which has been produced over the last 12 months, and then also focusing in on some of the particular aspects of the PSB's work. And that's really wide-ranging. It focuses on the Safer Vale Partnership in terms of community safety, the Food Vale Partnership, and some of the work that we've been doing in Llantryd Major around food access, the progress that's being made to make the Vale age-friendly and to achieve age-friendly status for the Vale, and then also some information around some play schemes and also giving families a flying start. The report then concludes in terms of the next steps for the PSB. And being at year 4 of 5 of the PSB cycle means that we've recently concluded the work on the wellbeing assessment, which has been a hugely wide-ranging piece of work looking at evidence and data across a range of different themes in order to identify what the particular areas of focus for the future ought to be. And that will now come through the work of the PSB. We've got a meeting next week to talk about the draft wellbeing plan for 2023 onwards, and that will go out to consultation shortly, and the report to your committee this evening just describes some of that work and the focus that we're looking to be placing on this important work that we're doing in partnership. The report also recommends that your committee consider whether there are any particular areas of focus of the PSB's work that you feel would be worthy of future scrutiny, either by yourselves or by one of the other council's scrutiny committees, and also that we're doing that work around the development of the wellbeing plan. So that's a really quick talk, but obviously I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Oh, Councillor Hanks, please.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, I was just wondering, with the time banking, that was going really well before the pandemic, and I just wondered if it was back to where it was, or are we lagging behind in that aspect of getting it up and running, please?
Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Yeah, absolutely. You're right to say there was a bit of a hiatus during the pandemic. I met with colleagues on that project earlier on today, actually, to talk about the next iteration of that. We're really pleased and grateful to colleagues at Public Health Wales who've continued to fund that project, and we're looking at broadening the scheme to becoming a scheme called Value in the Vale, which would be open not only to council housing tenants but also all of the residents of the Vale of Glamorgan, offering opportunities to volunteer and also offering rewards for doing that volunteering work. So I know that my colleagues in housing are liaising with a range of local businesses. The previous iteration of the time banking scheme was really successful, as you say, in garnering that kind of volunteering spirit, and also worked with a national company in providing those kind of rewards. this iteration of the scheme is more locally focused. So we're specifically looking at opportunities to work with local businesses in order to support that kind of reward and recognition of time banking. As a result of that meeting this afternoon, I've asked colleagues to do a little bit more work around how to make that model really sustainable going into the future. But certainly it's back up and running.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, I think you muted.
No, I'm not. Well, not according to this.
I can hear you now, Chair. Sorry, the sound went.
Oh dear. I think that the system is probably had enough. Right then, sorry, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, I note you asked this committee to consider if making any recommendations about sort of expanding the work or sort of taking the work out to other scrutiny committees for consideration. But it is just a reminder with my champions hat on, and I know Councillor Hamilton is also here as a champion, it is to ensure that there's a link between the champions role and obviously the work that the scrutiny committees are doing, because in particular the age friendly and the eat well and move well sort of links in or across a number of the champion roles, whereby I think those champion roles can play a significant part in influencing or shaping the decisions that are taken in the forthcoming period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And absolutely, that's a really good example of where there is a link across those champion roles, the cabinet portfolios, the scrutiny committees, and into the work of the PSB. And I know that the recent event around age-friendly and bringing relevant organisations was a really good example of that. So, and I know they appreciated you being there to host that, as well as our older persons champion.
Thank you, Tom. I can only sort of emphasise to colleagues in this committee, it has resulted in some further meetings now and some further relationships being built, which hopefully will filter back into sort of the work that we do for this period. You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, I think your sound has gone again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Chair.
I'm going to just have to hold my headphones tight to my head, aren't I? Oh dear. Okay, everybody. Does anybody else have any questions for Tom? No? Okay, that's great. So can we note the intended way forward to develop the new plan for 2023-2028? It's a very good point about linking what is in this with the work that the champions are doing. Not quite sure how that could be achieved, Tom, but certainly sharing of the information would be really, really helpful. So can we at this point move on this to the next agenda item? Can I have a hand? Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. And can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Campbell.
Chair, very briefly, just obviously another point was members recommend this report is circulated to all elected members via email and referred to Community Liaison Committee. Committee happy to action that as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
With apologies, yes, it needs to be circulated to all elected members and referred to the Community Liaison Committee. Can you hear me when I take my hands off my head? Can I still be heard?
Yes, Chair, it is. It seems to be fine at the moment.
I won't move. I'm going to stay absolutely stock still. Okay, so agenda item 11, which is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q1 performance. And this is from the 1st of April to the 20th of June. This report seeks our consideration of Q1 performance results and the proposed remedial actions to address areas of underperformance. So over to Tom for the finale. Thank you.
That's quite an introduction, Chair. I'll do my best for you. If I may, I'll share my screen and I'll walk you through the appended presentation, and then obviously be able to take any questions. Can I just check that that's sharing okay for you, Chair? Great stuff. So as a result of feedback from elected members as to how we present scrutiny committees with the information on the annual delivery plan quarterly performance, this is the presentation which is appended to the covering report. And at the end of Q1, it's relatively early in the year, obviously, but the overall status of the annual delivery plan is showing as green. The actions attributed to all 4 wellbeing objectives have all got a green status. The measures have all got an amber status. So overall, the judgment of Q1 is that we're at a green status. This slide here just draws out some of the achievements that have been delivered at this point of the year. Committee have touched on a number of these during your meeting earlier on today, and some of the reflection in the self-assessment, but just to highlight some of the key things. The public participation strategy was agreed in May. Good progress has been made already in mobilising that programme as Participate Fail. We're taking some work forward with council champions, for example, as part of that. The report also draws out some of the information that we're doing in terms of hybrid working and how we're rationalising office accommodation as part of the Your Space project.
Well, I think you've frozen, Tom. If you can hear us, you might have to just come in and out of the or turn your camera off. Just get the bandwidth back. Hopefully, committee Tom will just come back on.
Is that any better?
Yeah, I can hear you, Tom. Yeah. And the
Excellent.
presentation's still on.
Yes.
My apologies, committee. So yes, we have we're showing here some of the key achievements that have been delivered in Q1. So we're highlighting, as I said, the work around public participation and the work around office accommodation, and some of the key metrics in terms of financial savings and customer inquiries that have been made. The report also highlights the work that's underway in terms of delivering the 21st Century Schools programme and lists some of the schemes there, as well as the work that within Regeneration are doing in order to develop that permanent team to engage and support with our communities. In terms of supporting people at home and in their community, this report highlights that we've undertaken some work internally to support the Disasters Emergency Committee in terms of the Ukrainian humanitarian appeal. Staff walked over 1,775 miles, the distance from the Vale of Glamorgan to Ukraine, raising money for that particular appeal. And we've also done some work, as committee would expect, around supporting people in terms of the cost of living crisis. An example here from colleagues in shared regulatory services. And then finally, in terms of Objective 4, continue to do some work within schools in terms of LED lighting and also exploring opportunities for renewable energy being used there, as well as electric vehicles, charging points being installed within the council's car parks. So that's a picture of what's been achieved. In terms of your committee in particular, Chair, this is the performance snapshot at the end of the quarter. You can see, for example, that 93% of the actions are attributed to green status, 42% of the measures. And as requested by elected members, there are hyperlinks in this presentation taking you to those 14 actions and 4 measures which are attributed a red status. So there's an appendix to the report with those performance exceptions shown for you. And those performance exceptions directly influence areas for future focus and improvement, and they're what's shown on this screen. These are particularly within the remit of your committee, Chair, and they incorporate issues such as responding to the sickness absence metrics, looking at improving the number of corporate complaints which are being dealt with within timescale, and progressing the digital inclusion work with the Digital Inclusion Steering Group. We're working towards developing that community development and innovation team. There's been a slight delay in the quarter because of funding, but work has continued to progress. We'll also be taking forward some work now in the coming months around expanding the availability of broadband. Country Parks and Dunraven Bay, for example, will soon be supplied with fibre for use by both businesses and residents. We're exploring the joint working arrangement that's required to improve engagement and outcomes for young people who are perpetrating violence and persistent ASB. And a really important area of work that we'll be taking forward is continuing to provide support to citizens and staff in view of the cost of living crisis and the wide-ranging impacts that that's having. Committee will also note that there was a slight dip in performance in terms of our residual waste performance, and work is going to be undertaken to redress that balance in the coming months, along with work to progress the LED street lighting conversion programme as well. So that's a really quick summary, Chair, of the quarterly performance at the end of quarter 1.
Tom. Do we have any questions for Tom on Councillor Goodjohn?
I'll be brief because it's been a long meeting and I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing questions for Tom. I just wanted to ask regarding measures and actions. I'm noting that what regularly happens with these reports is that our measures are in a much worse situation than our actions. And I'm aware that particularly with this sector, it's hard to find measures that accurately show the impact that we are having in our communities, particularly regarding actually Objective 1, which is working with our communities, because so much is overlapped with the work of Welsh Government and Westminster, and many other factors that are completely out of our control, such as the recent mini budget and other such factors. I'm just wondering if it's worth perhaps considering relooking at the measures that we use to indicate how well we're doing, simply on the fact that they don't seem to be moving at much of a pace, and are really reflecting the work that's going on, simply because the measures are, if you looked at purely the measures, you'd think that we're doing a pretty poor job, but that if you looked at purely actions, then we're succeeding a lot for what we're attempting to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. It's a very good question, and it's one that we do review these on an annual basis and bring them to scrutiny committees, and the working group that I mentioned as part of that performance calendar item earlier. The next time we convene that is to look at the kind of service plans, target setting, process, and the way that that's brought to committees, and importantly giving you as elected members the opportunity to scrutinise and challenge on those measures and targets. It is always difficult, and what's interesting as well is the basket of different measures, because they're quite often, as you say, they're almost proxies for the impact that we're having at a population level. We set the corporate plan, because we want to improve the well-being of our residents. That doesn't happen on a quarterly basis necessarily, so we need to find ways of demonstrating steps towards it, and also the different levels of measures, for example. So it's difficult obviously to compare the number of people that follow us on Twitter with the delivery of a balanced budget and savings. So it's having to see those things in the round. I suppose the response might be that absolutely we need to get the basket of measures right, and it would be really good to have that challenging conversation in the early part of 2023. And secondly, I think it's important for us to see the set of measures in the round, and also importantly where they're maybe not achieving the target that we set, the rationale for not doing so, and importantly then the steps that we're going to take to readdress that balance.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so can I just ask for clarity, Tom, are you saying that when your working group convenes to set and rework measures and targets, that report will come to us for scrutiny for what you're suggesting, and this will be at the beginning of next year?
Absolutely, Chair. I suppose there are two aspects to that. The informal member working group will consider the process that we go through, and that will include how we present the information for scrutiny. But absolutely all scrutiny committees in the early part of the calendar year will be afforded the opportunity to formally consider the measures and the targets that council services are setting to achieve those measures as part of the scrutiny process as well.
Thank you. So if we don't have any specific recommendations to Cabinet for their consideration for this report, can we have a hand to move on this one? Thank you, Councillor, good job. And can we have a seconder? Thank you ever so much, Councillor Hamilton. So that's agenda item 11. Agenda item 12 was any urgent items part 1, which I have none. And agenda item 13 was any urgent items part 2, and there's also none. So you'll be very, very relieved to know that that is the end of our meeting. Thank you all for your patience. Sorry about the slight technical difficulties. For your diary, the date for the next meeting will be Wednesday, the 18th of November, at tea time, 6 o'clock. So thank you all again, and we'll speak soon.
Right, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Chair.
you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair,
Thank you.
just to say, it's November
night.
the 16th.
Right.
Wednesday, November the 16th.
Oh, there we are. Wednesday, November the 16th, not the 18th.
Not 18th,
Thank you.
no. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a
Thank you very much.
Friday. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Chair.